I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 213, Katie's Story, Joyful Weight Loss. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. Get ready to learn how to live in your dream body, free from all the diet rules. You're going to learn the naturally thin mindset and strategies so that you never need to count, track, or measure your food ever again. And instead, you get to live the rest of your life at your body's optimal weight with the peace and freedom you've been craving. Let's dive in. Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's podcast episode. I have Katie on today with us. And I titled this episode Joyful Weight Loss because we talk a little bit about it as the episode goes on, how it's kind of an oxymoron for those of us that have struggled with our weight for so long to actually experience, not just intellectually sort of understand, but to have a lived experience of joyful weight loss. And I think that's what you'll hear from Katie today. You can hear the joy, the calm, and the peace and the freedom in her voice. And you'll hear her talk about how food and weight were on her mind incessantly since she can remember about being 10 and how she struggled with both weight and health issues and used food to solve some of those health issues, but found that it actually stopped working along the way. So the benefit and the payoff of being so hyper-focused on food, she kind of lost, because she then had some health symptoms that came back that the food was no longer able to solve for her. And she shares how she has used the Naturally Thin method and the Naturally Thin for Life tools that she's learned inside the membership to be so much more aligned with her naturally thin self, and how she's lost 12 pounds, feeling so joyful and feeling light and nourished and energized in her body. And that she doesn't fear hunger or the scale in the same way that she used to. Plus, of course, she shares so much more beyond that. So get ready to walk away from this episode with a stronger belief than ever before that it is so possible for you to have the exact relationship with food and your body that you want. All right, enjoy this conversation I had with Katie. All right. Well, welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. Today I have Katie with us, and I'm just going to kick it right over to you. Katie's a member of Naturally Thin for Life, and she's here to share some of her journey and inspire those of you listening to really see how possible it is for you to be able to have the relationship with food and your body that you want. So why don't you share with us maybe a little what your experience has been like prior to Naturally Thin for Life, and maybe some of the things you did related to food and your body and weight, and like some of the things you had tried and what that's been like for you.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that. Gosh, I'm trying to even think back to when like my whole food negative relationship started a long time ago. I'd say like around, I can clearly kind of remember around age 10, understanding like my relationship with food, and wasn't always a positive one. Actually, from that moment, it was a very negative one because there were so many things outside of my control as a child. And I just thought this is the only way to really like control some things in my life. And so it wasn't like that naturally thin, like kid, like where you could just like eat whatever they wanted and like never gain weight. Or I always like have pictures of myself younger of being a little heavier, like compared to like my older sister who was kind of just thin. And so I developed like this jealousy of like, I want to be able to eat that. This is actually fast forwarding a little bit into like teenage years when like we were in high school and we could go off campus to go eat lunch, and I just love to do that. But I remember going to this place that they had like personal pan pizzas, and I was like, I can't eat that. I just can't eat that. If I eat that, I'm just going to gain weight. And so, just like that negative, restrictive thought patterning in my childhood where it was like, I can't eat that. Like, I know if I do, I'm just gonna gain weight. And I just always like one of those people that like, you look at food and you gain weight. Like that was just kind of how I thought, that's how it was.
Smell it.
Yes. It was very easy for me to gain weight, but it was very difficult for me to lose weight. And I remember at like 16, I got a membership at Bally's. It was like an exercise place. And I was so excited about that because I was like, I'm finally going to get this, I'm really going to do this. I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to, do other. And I never was really like super heavy. Like I never was, because I always really tried to be in control of it, to a point, like I never really got like super huge. And so, that just trickled into adulthood and everything. I mean, it's just, and then marriage with kids and I got pretty heavy with my first daughter. And I was just like, oh, it's a free for all. I can finally eat whatever I want. I'm so excited. And then but not really like excited because it was just kind of like, what am I doing? But I couldn't kind of like stop myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know exactly how much I gained. I think I gained like probably 60 pounds. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even realize like it wouldn't just come off easily. Like it took years. And I tried to go back to like the restricting and doing all that. And then my second child, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a little more conscious of, I'm going to work out and I'm going to, eat a little better, not like go crazy. And I think I still gained like 50 pounds, maybe even 60 pounds. I still just like, it really was not much of a difference. So I was like, gosh, I did all this work and like, it didn't even like make a difference. And so I think it's about 9 or 10 years ago, I became like really sick. I don't really know what it was that was causing it, but I just had like really bad physical symptoms. Like I was really fatigued. I would get like numbness, really just not, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't quite figure out what was wrong. So I went to all these different doctors and tried to figure out, what was wrong. And they're like, well, your panels are fine, you're okay. And then I'd be okay for like, a week or two. And then like, I'd have like all the symptoms back. And then it became like a consistent every day to day. Like I had all this physical pain and I was just really scared. And I was like, I don't know what is going on. Why is this happening? Again, went to all these different doctors and nobody said anything. They're like, you're fine. Like everything. I'm like, but I know there's something wrong. So I went down the journey of like finding this doctor who was like a functional medicine doctor. And he was like, well, I put all my clients on a plant-based diet and it really helps with the inflammation. And, I want you to, do this, while he was doing like all the labs and stuff. Well, I knew kind of in the back of my head, like it has to do with food. It has to do with food. It has to do with food. And I went literally cold turkey. Like from that day, I literally ate plant-based and I was like super clean and, all that kind of stuff. And fast forward like 6 months, I found this other person who was all about like, almost like raw, but like even cleaner than what I was eating. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do that because I think it has to do with, Epstein-Barr and I had mono in the past and, like really thinking about like these viruses that I was having because nothing else was making any sense. And this made sense. I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So, I went full force into it and I ate that way for about good 4 years. I had lost a lot of weight. I got down to 140, which is, I never in my life had gotten down to 140. I stayed there for like a brief minute, but I got down to like my goal weight, which is where I want to get to. But I was so determined that this food was going to heal me. And then about 4 years ago, I started to work full time. And up until then, I was a stay-at-home mom and was with my kids. And I started to go work full time and I loved my job, but the stress of it was overwhelming. And I was still eating the same way. So in my mind, I'm thinking, the food's healing me. I'm good. But then when the stress like was so beyond, I panicked because the food wasn't working. All of my symptoms came back, like almost like full force. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like I panicked again because I was like, I thought I figured this out.
Yeah.
And the stress just took me over the edge. And so I ended up, it was during COVID. So, luckily it was like during COVID because then I was able to like stay home. But at the same time, it was just kind of like, I don't know what to do. And so I kind of went like back to where the raw one was, and I was like, I'm just going to do it even more, like I was like, this is the answer. I'm going to do a cleanse and I'm going to do this. And I'm like, this is really going to work. And so I spent like, 2-3 months during like the first like shutdown when we had with the COVID and nothing was working. And I'm like, this isn't even working. What is going on? I just don't understand. And I was in so much pain and I'm like, I was just lost. I was like, I don't know what to do. And so I had gone over to talk with my friend and she was telling me, she knew like a lot of my history about like with my physical symptoms and all that. And she was like, you think maybe it's not the food because you're doing everything right. And maybe it's really not the food. And I literally was like a wake up moment. Like it was like palpable. Like I was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? I thought it was the food.
Yeah.
And from that day on, it was just kind of like, oh, wait, no, it's not the food. I mean, yes, there's a part of it, but that's not going to heal me emotionally and mentally and spiritually, maybe physically, but I had so many other things that I needed to heal that I was like putting food as the thing that was going to do it all, you know?
Yeah.
Because that's all I knew.
Yes. Did you ever get a diagnosis from that first doctor, the functional medicine doctor?
No, I mean, he said I had like fibromyalgia or something. And I was like, okay, but it didn't really like give me any sort of peace. No, I really never got like a real diagnosis because they really couldn't pinpoint anything that would like tie it together to be like, oh, you have this. And so I think maybe if I kept going or maybe really wasn't trying to heal and like figure out other ways to heal, I probably would have been able to get a diagnosis, but I really wanted a diagnosis really to just be like, see, I'm not crazy, but I never did. And so I really had a hard time with that because I was like, I really just wanted to know what this is so I can really fix it. But I think that was almost on purpose. Like I didn't have a diagnosis so that I didn't get so stuck in that and then only focus on that. So it was kind of a blessing, I guess. And I had done a lot, after I had this kind of like revelation of like, oh yeah, it's not the food, I had really done a lot of like healing and spiritual healing and, mental healing and things like that. But there was still the piece of food that was kind of like still hanging over me that I was like, I know there's something else that I'm not getting. And I don't know what that is. And I had read Bethany Frankel's Naturally Thin book years ago and was like, oh yeah, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to be that, and I like tried to adopt all the different 10 rules or whatever she talked about. And I did okay with it, but I wasn't like, I really didn't understand it in the way that I do now with how you taught version of the Naturally Thin. And so I knew there was something that like, I know I can be naturally thin. I know this is possible because I see women that are, and I'm like, and they eat whatever they want and they don't have any regrets and they don't stress about it. Like, it's just this natural thing. And I'm like, I know I could have that, but I feel like I'm missing something. I'm like, what am I missing? And so I then was like, kind of like threw in the towel and I was like, well, I'm just going to eat whatever I want because really the food, like when I was on the plant-based, like raw, like clean, all that, if I wanted to eat like meat or dairy or anything like that, like I didn't really have a reaction to it. So I was like, well, I'm just going to go eat like that again. And like, just be like, cause I don't really have a reaction to it. I'm just going to eat it. Then I ballooned up like 10 more, like 15 more pounds that I was like, wait, I don't think that's and I was like, it's okay. Just ride it out. Like your body will regulate itself when it gets used to eating that again. Like, and I was like, I don't think I can wait. Like, this is really uncomfortable. I do not want to be this big. I'm like, this is not where I'm supposed to be. And so I remember it was like around July of this year. And my husband and I were going out to a event that we were going to. And that day I was like, nothing fit. I have all these clothes in my closet that I just love. And I can't fit into anything. Or like, they're just super tight. And I'm like, they never used to be tight. And I'm putting this dress on and I'm like, I'm going out with my husband. I want to have this fun time. I'm like so depressed and just so angry and just so like, why can't I figure this out? And I'm telling him this like in the car, like sobbing on the way to this event where I'm like trying to figure out like what I'm going to eat. It's like always like figuring out like, what am I going to eat? Do I have to eat this? And I don't really want to eat that. Like I really wanted to eat the pizza that was going to be there, but I'm like, I can't eat that. I shouldn't eat that, like the whole thing in my head. And just really battling with this. I'm like, I can't figure this out. And so my husband's like, and I was telling him about you because I'd been listening to your podcast for, a good like 9 months or something and really understood it and like connected with it. Was just like, oh, this makes so much sense. And trying to do it on my own, like all the things you were saying in your podcast. And he's like, well, why don't you just join? He's like, it'll be so much faster for you than having to like struggle through this on your own. Yes, I'm sure you understand the information and you can do the work that she's talking about, but maybe it would just be faster if you would just kind of like join and get some support. And I was like, no, I got to do it on my own. Like I was always like that type of person, like, I'm not going to ask for help. I'm going to do this on my own. You know, I've made it this far. And so he was like, you know, why don't you think about that? And I was like, fine, you know, kind of thing, like, all right, you know. And then we get to this event and I'm eating the French fries, which is what I usually would get because I was like feeling like a little decadent, but yet like it's still clean, you know, kind of thing. And all the while he's sitting there eating his pizza and I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks so good. I just want to eat the pizza. And then I eat more of the fries than I want to eat, you know, so I'm overeating. And I think it was like a couple weeks after that is when I joined Naturally Thin because I was like, I need help. This is not going well. And I don't want to live like this anymore.
It's so exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Like, right? Even just so you think about energy drain of like going somewhere that's supposed to be like a nice time for you and your husband and like having fun. And when you don't feel good, it's really hard.
Yeah, I couldn't
enjoy
be
yourself.
Present. And I was so focused on the food and how I felt uncomfortable in my dress and in my body. And I was just like, this is terrible. This sucks.
Yeah. And it's so funny you say that because I had a couple of those like same revelations where, you know, I had obviously read Bethany Frankel's book. I had read, you know, many books and, you know, like Why French Women Don't Get Fat. And there's one title with some explicitives in it. So I won't share, but I like, you know, I'd read all these and I'm like, okay, they're all of these quote unquote naturally thin women.
Yeah.
None of them care so much about the food. And I was like a righteous plant-based vegan.
Yeah. Yes.
So, like, or gluten-free vegan. I mean, so I'm like, I should. And I like exercise more than you. And I watch my alcohol more than you. And like, like I felt so entitled to like living in a naturally thin body. And I'm like, okay, but the common denominator among these women seem to be they just don't think about food that much, which was mind blowing to me because like you shared earlier, I had thought about food a lot ever since I was, you know, a little kid.
Yeah. I was just like, how is that possible? Like, I want that so badly.
Yeah.
And yet I couldn't figure out how to get out of only thinking about food like that. It was like my entire brain. That's all it was focused on. As soon as I woke up to the time I went to bed, even when I was sleeping, it was just like, that's all I thought about. And it's exhausting.
It is so exhausting. And it's like our brains have this amazing capability of, you know, like working, but also thinking about something else or like, you know, being at a party, talking to someone, also thinking about something else. And it's like the thing that I was always thinking about, you know, in the back of my mind was food or my weight or, you know, it wasn't like I was thinking about it to the exclusion of other things, but it's just like, it's always like right behind the curtain in my own brain constantly.
Constantly. Yes. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, what has it been like for you in Naturally Thin for Life? What have you learned? What changes have you made?
It was a big learning curve actually, which was interesting because I didn't think it was going to be that difficult, but I think it's so much of, like we were just saying, is my brain was so focused on the food that when I was doing the buckets and the brain dump and the model, like I was kind of just doing it like robotically in the beginning, just like, I got to do this, you know. And then like about halfway through it clicked, like halfway through the 90 days, it like clicked and it was like, oh, and one time in particular, I was out and about and I had done the buckets and everything. Like I knew like how I wanted to feel that day. And I'm at Whole Foods where I love to go because it's just like a variety of food that I can just choose from that, you know, I know will make me feel good. And I was like, oh, I could get this, I could get this, I could get this. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. And then I was like, wait a second. I was like, kind of having that battle again of like, do I want this or do I want, and then I was like, oh, wait, how do I want to feel? And I was like, oh yeah, I want to feel light. And I love the 3 words, light, nourished, and energized. And I was literally like immediately be able to go and pick up what I wanted to get. And I got the sandwich and it was like, wow, that feels amazing. Like that was like when it like clicked for me. It was a good like month and a half, I think, at least, where I was just doing it. I was very diligent with it in the sense of like, I knew this worked and it was like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing it until like, I know like it's going to like set in where I'm really going to be thinking as like a naturally thin woman and like make those choices and those decisions from that naturally thin woman that I think I am. And so kind of from then on, it was like, oh, okay. I mean, obviously I had some setbacks where I was just like, oh, but I really want to eat this. And then I was like, wait, but do I really want to? And so pulling myself back into that satisfaction language because, oh, and this is the other thing. I didn't really even do the satisfaction language in the beginning. It was more of the percentage of like how satisfied I wanted to feel. That felt more understandable to me because I was a calorie counter. And so I had to do the numbers and all that. And so I was more into that. And then I started to realize like, I really only wanted to eat like, 50% full or like satisfied. Like I didn't really like any more than that. And then I was like, well, what does that feel like? And so then I started like developing the language that I really loved the language more. It just seems so much more peaceful, graceful, and comforting. So now I focus more on like the language rather than the number, even though it's still kind of always there of like, oh yeah, it's about 50% because that's how I feel when I'm like done eating. I don't like to feel full and really full. And I like the flexibility of being like, okay, if I'm at 50%, then the next time I eat, like, I know like it's okay. Like I still want to feel light, nourished, and energized. And that just feels amazing. It just feels amazing. So that, as well as the model and the first model of, like the stressful thoughts and the negativity, and how typically the result at the bottom was always unhappy and stuck. And I was like, I don't want to be unhappy and stuck. I want to be free. And so it was so interesting how I could see on that bottom model how those actions were really helping me to be happy and free. It was a great contrast to see over and over and over again. Every time I do it, I was like stuck and, unhappy. And then it was like happy and free. And it's just like how simple it was to just change those thoughts to be able to see that. I mean, simple now as like in the future, but in the moment, it was just kind of like observing it and just being like, huh, that's interesting. I always am feeling stuck with the way that is. I'm like, I don't want to be stuck anymore. Like I want to be free.
And isn't that so crazy? Like, it's almost like we get familiar or like comfortable with being stuck. I don't know how else to describe it, but it just is like, it's just like the zone we know how to live in. At least that's what it felt like for me. And so it just kind of compounds, right? Like it just begets more of it the same. And it's being able to have that skill of like, oh, let me just shift that a little bit and like see what else is possible. Then you get to have a completely different experience without like doing a whole lot. Like you're not running a marathon. Like it and it's so crazy.
Yeah. I was just talking to my daughter this morning because I weighed myself again because I hadn't weighed myself in a while. And I was like, I lost 12 pounds. And she's like, what? She's like, you did that without ever exercising, or like, and you got to eat whatever you wanted. And I was like, I know. Cause she is basically naturally thin too. I'm always like, how do you do that? And she's always kind of been that way. And so her telling me that today, and she was just like, that's amazing, Mom. And I was like, I know, it's so cool. It's so exciting. It's so free. And it's just so exactly what I wanted. I wanted that freedom to be able to just be like, wow, I can eat whatever I want and still lose weight.
And it's so fascinating to me too, that I think most of us, and it's why inside the membership, I talk about satisfaction level and satisfaction language, and level is a percentage for anyone listening that you kind of associate with your ideal satisfaction level. And then language is giving it like more of that like colorful, robust language. But for years, I didn't know how to do that. Like I just used the level all the time. And I was like, and I don't know if many of us have the skill and or the connection to our body to be able to describe how we want to feel other than, oh, I just don't want to feel terrible.
Right. That was definitely a challenge for me, because when it was in several of your podcasts, but it's also in the membership of like, what your future self, your naturally thin self, what's she thinking, feeling, doing, and then it's like, yeah, like, what is she thinking? What is she feeling? Like, how does she feel in that 140-pound body? Like, and I just love that because I'm like, wow, I never even thought about that before. Like, I just never was able to even think that far ahead to even know what would she be feeling?
Yeah.
And so I just love that. It's just such a neat tool to have and skill to have that you can bring into now. And like you say, like, this makes the journey of losing weight it's so much more exciting. And I'm like, what does she mean by that? Like, I remember listening to your old podcast, like, is she for real? Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I think for so many of us that have struggled for so long, we're like so in that like rabbit hole almost that it's like you can't even imagine like enjoying losing weight. Like that sounds like what's it,
No.
an oxymoron? Like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And like you were just saying, being able to go to Whole Foods and of course, we always can choose what we want. We're adults. But
Yeah.
to be able to have what you want only be food that feels good, like
Yeah.
it's just the best.
It's the best. The best. And it was funny too, because even before then, this just popped in my head. Even before then, I had gone out to lunch with my friend and I had just kind of discovered, and it's kind of crazy. Obviously, I kind of knew this, but I think just really integrated it that I can eat what I want, when I want, in any amount. Like I was kind of like blown away by that. That I obviously, like I said, the intellectually, I knew that, but like really understanding that and being like, wow, I can eat anytime I want, whenever I want, and in any amount. Like, what? This is crazy. This is like a whole nother world
Yeah.
because my whole thing was wrapped up in hunger. Like, I was terrified of hunger
Mm.
and was like, the first tinge of hunger, it was like, oh, I gotta eat. I gotta eat. I haven't eaten enough, because this kind of goes back into like the physical pain that I was having where I was like, I didn't eat enough protein or I didn't eat
Mm.
enough salt because that was one of the things that they had said, like your sodium's really low or your potassium's really low. So it was like, oh, I needed to eat a banana. I need, you know what I mean? So it was like, it was always focused on the food.
Yeah.
And so when it was like, wow, like I can actually eat not when I have the first tinge of hunger and like really making that relationship with hunger, that was a huge one for me that I really struggled with because I just had my whole relationship with hunger was fear.
Yeah.
And so that understanding that I can eat whenever I want, whenever I want, and whatever I want was a huge revelation for me. So yeah.
And so when you said, like remembering back to your childhood and food was just kind of
Mhm,
constantly on your mind, and then it was like almost
mhm,
like sounding like more and more on your mind, especially like when you're trying to figure out and heal your body. What's
mhm.
it like now for you with when it is on your mind, what it's like when it's on your mind? Like what's that experience like now?
It's so much more peaceful and calm. I haven't quite completely mastered all of it, but when I get to like a level of, 7, I was at like a level of 5 or 6. Also, this is kind of in the beginning too of being like, 5 or 6, I don't think I can go past that because I was just like
Mm.
too afraid to go even past that or thinking there was something, that I needed to make sure at 5 or 6 I was eating. And now it's kind of like, yes, 7 or 8. And it's like, and if I go a little longer, like it's okay. And thinking about, you know, I don't have to eat even at a 7 or an 8. It's kind of like, okay, I feel that, but it's just like, oh, I get to kind of like decide, well, I don't really have any access to food right now, or, I'm busy doing something right now. So it's just going to have to wait. Like, it's just like a nice controlled. So there's that kind of control that I wanted, but it was in such a erratic way before. And now it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I get to choose when I answer that. And I
Yeah.
just never knew that before. Like that was so foreign to me. And
Yeah.
so it just feels so peaceful and I feel so much more in control and more confident with it. And then if it is, past an 8 or a 9 even, and I'm really hungry, it's still just like, it's okay. Like, how do you want to feel? Like, I just
Mhm.
go back to how do I want to feel instead of being like, oh man, I waited too long. Now I have to eat. Like, no panic. It's calm. It's peaceful. I love it so much.
Mm.
It's so nice.
It is so nice. It just makes I don't know for you, but like we still have life experiences that are stressful and we still have
Yeah.
anxiety, right? There's still other things and there's still obviously the joyful time. And when food isn't the stressful thing, like all of the time, like it's just like you can, the
Oh,
stressful moments that come up, like, I don't know, I just feel like I can tackle them so much better because
yes.
it's not like the thing pushing me over the edge because I'm constantly stressed about food and my weight.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so different now with like 4 years ago when I was working full time and that stress, it was like there was no room for that stress because I had all the other stressful thoughts about food in my brain. I was like, there's no other room. So it was just kind
Yeah.
of like, there's just not room. Now it's like you said, it's just kind of like, there's obviously stressful things and anxiety and things like that. But it's like, yeah, I have so much more patience and calm to be able to get through it because I'm not so radically like in my brain, like freaking out about what am I going to eat? How much am I going to eat? Did I eat this? Did I eat that? When it's just, it's like not there. And I just wanted that so desperately.
Yeah. And I think you've shared this before, like just that strong desire for wanting to feel in control. And I
Yes.
think some of us have it a little stronger than others. I have a
Yeah.
super strong desire for wanting to feel in control.
Hmm.
But when we're dieting and losing weight that way, when it's so food focused, it's like
Yeah.
we've misplaced that control where it's like we're trying to control the food, which ends up sort of controlling us,
Yeah.
versus just feeling so in control of how you feel,
Yeah.
like physically and emotionally. And
Yes.
then the food just falls into place so much more easily. And it's so much
Yes.
less time and energy intensive than trying to control the
Yes.
food.
Yeah. And it's so crazy because I thought, well, and that's what being naturally thin is. It's like really focusing on how you want to feel versus the food. And I'm like, what? This is insane. And it's so true. It feels so amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's crazy.
It is kind of mind-blowing even still when I like hear you talk or I think back on my own journey, how it almost blows my mind at how mind-blowing that is to us. You know,
I
that
know,
it's
right?
like
It's like
it's
other people would be like, well, duh, like, but you don't understand.
yeah, yeah, but it's like
Yeah.
to not have that experience for most of your life, it's like doing a 180 on yourself
Yes.
in just how you think
Yes.
about food in your body.
Yeah.
So, are you willing to share at all a little about how you have used the scale? Or I know we've talked before about the scale and
Yeah.
your thoughts about the scale, and you've had some fear around the scale. So, I don't know if you're willing to share what it's been like for you when you have used the scale, why maybe there have been periods of time when you haven't, and what that's like now.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm still working on. But I do feel a lot more calm about it. When you had coached me on that several weeks ago, when you had asked the question of like, well, what kind of relationship do you want with it? And that really helped me to just kind of like not make it such a big deal, but
Mm,
make it more of like, yeah, like again, like I get to choose what kind of relationship I want with this. And that was really comforting. And so that day, like several weeks ago when I had weighed myself, it was like, okay. And like, and I think it's more of the, what I feel in my body doesn't match necessarily what's on the scale. And I'm like, gosh, but I feel so amazing. How come it's not showing on the scale? Like it should be less. Right. But today when I got on, it was just kind of like, okay, I had the thoughts of like, well, it should be less, or actually this is really good, just kind of like the back and forth kind of thoughts with it. But it was very peaceful and calm. Like it was
mm,
just really like, yeah, like I know, yeah, 12 pounds, like that's amazing. Like, and like what my daughter's just like without like restricting, without like depriving. And it was just like, that's really amazing. And it does actually match up, with how I am feeling because like I know like I still have weight to lose, but it's not this like big, it's over there in the corner of the house. Like I'm going to avoid it kind of thing. It's kind of like, yeah, it's there. If I want to kind of know, sure. But at the same time, it's just kind of like, I feel so amazing that I know I'll get to my goal weight, my naturally thin weight when I get there.
yeah.
And so it's a much more peaceful way of being. And yeah, I mean, even going back several years ago when I was pregnant and just being like, I don't want to know what that number is, even though it's just kind of like, I know it's probably much bigger than what I want it to be or whatever. But I was just so terrified to get on there. And I would avoid going to the doctor because I was like, I don't want to know. Even if it was just like, here, just write it down over here. And I just don't want to know. But like, even just like anticipating it, like I'd almost avoid going to the doctor just because of that. And I was like, that's just insane. Whereas now it's just like, okay, whatever, so it is, the relationship is much more calm, but I'm still working on it. So it's definitely, because I still want to have that objective number that I see be my reality. And so I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting there. So.
And I think even just the way you talk about it, it's so important when you think about the longevity of your relationship with food in your body, right? To use the scale or to tie like whether or not we're having success solely to a number on the scale without regard to how we're feeling. It can put so much unnecessary pressure. And a lot of times that pressure is what leads us to like restricting and then overdoing it and then doing something, super crazy and then saying, forget it all. And it's just like when you can have that calm, peaceful relationship with the scale because it's simply telling you how much you weigh and it's just not that big of a deal. You can use it in that way that you're talking about that is calm and peaceful and to sort of like almost like cement in for yourself of like, look at what I'm doing. And like, I can do this forever because I feel so good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just, it's such a different relationship than I've ever had with it. And it was such a big fear of mine. So kind of like the thing with hunger, like my fear with hunger, my relationship with hunger, it's like how I was able to really get the relationship I want with hunger now is like, I know I can have that with the scale and it's there. Like it's just, a little bit more time, kind of to integrate the relationship I want with it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Has your husband noticed a difference? I know you said obviously you had that moment in the car when you were talking about it going to the party or wherever you were going, but can he tell?
Yeah. He's like, you seem so much more calm. And he's like, wow, you've learned so much. He's like, you've grown so much. And it's just amazing how much you have changed in just a very short period of time. So yeah, I think he's seen more of the behavioral aspect than more of like the physical, you know? Cause I'll share with him my wins. And I was like, oh, I had this win today. And I was like, I can't wait to tell you about it. It's just, really focusing on those wins is really, really exciting. So yeah.
And that's what I meant too about, predominantly is he noticed that change because I don't know what your husband is like, but my husband does not understand my personality. Like I'm very much control freaky and he just doesn't quite, it's just not his experience. So he doesn't quite understand it. And so I think sometimes it can be hard for people in relationships with someone like my personality and maybe to some degree yours, where they see us like stressing ourselves out about, like food and our hunger and the dress and all the things. And they're like, I just want you to not be so stressed.
Totally. Yeah. He's like, why are you freaking out about that? I'm like, but you don't understand. It doesn't fit. Yeah. It doesn't and he's like, well, but just, you're doing great. You're eating what, and I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, it's just on a whole nother level. So yeah, he's just like, well, like, you didn't even eat that much. And I was like, I know it. That's not the point,
Yes. I'm like, there's no rational thinking that will solve this.
No, exactly. So yeah, he's definitely seen my growth. And that is really, really awesome.
So cool. What are you most excited about for yourself for the future?
Just being more in alignment with this version of myself, this naturally thin version of myself going forward, just more day to day, it just becomes more and more aligned. And I am just so happy about that. It's just such a peaceful, calm, comforting place to be. I'm just looking forward to more of that alignment and peace and comfort that comes along with like this version of myself that I always have known has been there. I just was never able to kind of tap into it. So I'm just looking forward to more and more of that feeling of just like, yeah, this is just the way it is. And this is just me. And I love it. And I'm so happy and joyful. And that's what I really am wanting. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So good. What do
yeah,
you think it was for you when you say, I had listened to the podcast for months and I was, kind of trying to implement what you were sharing on the podcast. What do you think
yeah.
it was for you about joining the membership that allowed you to make so much progress?
I think it was the support that like I said before, I have always done everything on my own, always been the responsible one, always been the one that's like, I pride myself on, I did this, but the support of like I look forward to every week coming to the live calls, even
Mhm.
if I don't even participate. I love it. It's just a community of women that are like me that in having your guidance and like you did this. And it's just like, it's just that support and that understanding and knowing that you did this, you created this and you're living this way. And I'm like, that's what I want. Like, I want to be surrounded by women like that. And just trying to find that community of women that it's just like, oh, I have that. And I think that really helped propel me into, because like I kind of knew this stuff before. Like I said, like I'd read Naturally Thin with Bethany, and like I I had done a lot of spiritual healing and all this stuff that I had been doing the last couple of years. But this just almost just like made it real. Like I could
Mhm.
really tie this together and really make this what I wanted it to be, which is how I'm living now. And so I just, it was the support as well as the workbook of like really focusing on
Mhm.
how I wanted to feel rather than the food. So there's several aspects to it, but the support, I think, and knowing that you have done this and that you're living proof was just like, I need that. I want that.
Mhm.
So that was really, I think, the push that got me through, because I
Mhm.
was, like I said, like I had done a couple of things you had said on your podcast, like you always have these wonderful questions to ask yourself, and then doing the model and all this stuff, and I was like, oh, I can do that, and I could, but yet there was still that piece missing of like the support. I think that was really the biggest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I don't know what it's like for you, but when I
Mhm.
look around at my life, I don't I mean, I have a couple people like from a distance who maybe I would be like, yeah, they probably I don't think they struggle with their weight. They never talk about it. They
Okay.
always, seem to like feel really good. That's not, I think, for most of us, like our general experience in our day to day with people. And it's
Right.
just it's it's easy to get almost like sucked into believing that it's some sort of like fairyland or like it's, that it's like some magical place that only a few people
Exactly. Yes.
genetically are, have been
Yes.
gifted with, and the rest of us have to suffer in our
Mhm.
mind and in our body. But
Yeah.
yeah, there is something so incredible, I think, about that like repetition of your mind being reminded of like, oh yeah, of course I can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And just listening to you and your podcast and how you've been doing this and then helping these women. And I'm like, I want that. Like she figured this out. She did this. And I'm like, and it's not that hard, but like, and I always knew like, I can figure this out, but you doing it and being living proof of it was just like, I'm going, that is where
Mhm.
I'm going, like
Mhm.
I need that. And it finally was like that dinner that my husband and I had gone to was just like that kind of rock bottom at that time, where it's just like, I can't do this anymore on my own. I'm really going to do this. And then I signed up. So yeah.
Yeah. So good. What would
Yeah.
you say to someone who maybe has been where you are or struggled in that way? If you were going to give someone like one or two pieces of like your best pieces of wisdom or like advice that you think would really help someone, like if they were like, okay, Katie, if I want to like implement something today to like see
Mhm.
some progress towards the peace and the freedom and the scale, like what would be one or two things, if you have any that are top of mind, that you'd be like, this is what I would tell you?
It's a tie between like, how do you want to feel, and that version of yourself, the naturally thin version of yourself,
Mm,
like envisioning her, what's she
mm,
doing, what's she thinking, what's she feeling. That is a big piece that I feel like someone who's like where I was several months ago could just even start thinking about. that version of themselves, because we just don't really even think that. We don't think about that future imagination of like, what could that look like? So I would say just taking a few minutes just to even imagine that. Like, it doesn't even have to take a long time. And then, you don't really have to do anything with that, but just even having that little inkling, like that little seed planted of just being like, what could that look like? And then they could go on with their day or doing whatever they do, but just like almost remembering that if they get to another space of being like, oh yeah, I remember when I was imagining this, it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So probably that.
Yeah. That is so good because it grows then, right?
Yeah.
I think we want it to be, at least I was always like, well, I want that to be done yesterday, like that Natural Thin version of me.
Yes.
Right. But it doesn't work that way. It grows over time. We've developed the habit of not being our naturally thin mind and body. We have to develop the habit of intentionally creating it for ourselves. And when you talk about, the other thing that you were saying about, how do you want to feel? If someone were to say to you, I don't know how I want to feel, or I'm not sure how I want to feel, or like, how do I get started with that? How would you respond to that?
I'd probably start with like, well, how do you feel now? Like, what do you feel like now? And mine, I could tell you right away when I was like in the thick of it, it was just like, I feel gross. I feel heavy. I feel, I know exactly how I feel in that moment. And then it's just kind of like, well, how do I want to feel? It's like, well, gosh, I'd love to feel just thin and light and energized, right? And all that. So it's like, if you could just focus on like what you feel like now, and then just imagining again, almost like that, what did you think that version of, just like, what do you want to feel like? Like, and you can feel like that, but not even like having that pressure of like, well, you can feel like that. It's more of just like, how you feel now, but like, what do you want to feel like?
Yeah. And I think it can be so powerful just even imagining that contrast in your own mind.
Yes.
Right. Because I think it's why so many of us get to what you were saying, like that rock bottom, or just like where we're so fed up, is because we're so fed up feeling physically that way.
Yes.
And it's like the more you can remember that, like we were saying with a scale, it's not about the number, right? It's about you want to lose weight because you want to feel so good in your body. And when you start to feel so good, and that's the motivation for your decisions around your food, you get to experience that right away, right? You don't have to wait until you've lost, 10 or 20 or 30 or more pounds.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That is such a big piece for me, because I wanted to be out of that feeling, but I didn't know how to have the future feeling or the imagination feeling. And so, and that takes some time, but it's like, it's still just like, oh, like I can actually imagine that. Like I have a vision for that. It's amazing. The freedom to have that. 'Cause I didn't think I could have the freedom to have that. So,
and having it be of your own making. Right?
yes.
Not because someone's like, oh, this is the diet you have to follow, or this is what you have to do. You're like, no, I want to feel this way because I decided this is how I want to feel. Right? Like it creates so much internal like momentum and motivation and accountability for yourself that we don't need anyone else, because right? We all know how we feel, like you're saying, and how we want to feel. Right. And then it becomes like on us in the best way possible, because no one else can do it for us.
Right. Right. And I think for a long time, like I didn't have that confidence that you talk about a lot in the program, and just like building that confidence is like those little things, consistently that build that confidence, that I didn't think that I could feel any different than how I felt, which was, just in pain and in, whatever. It's like, I can't get there. And so it's a little momentum that builds it up. And then it's just like, oh yeah, actually I can. And it is me. And having the confidence of being like, this, I get to choose this. And this is something that I get to be in control of. Where again, going back to that control piece of like, I wanted to control, but I didn't know how.
Yeah.
So it's magical.
Yeah. Oh, so amazing. Yeah. Well, before we end, is there anything that's on your mind, anything that you want to share with anyone listening, anything we haven't talked about that you want to get out there?
If you are, teetering or wavering on whether you want to sign up or not, and thinking like, oh, it's just another thing I'm going to do. Just sit with that for a second and see, and then just know it's here, it's available, and you have support, and you'll find freedom on the other side. If it was like me just thinking like, oh, I can do this all on my own. Yes, you can, but it's so much faster and so much more peaceful when you have support. And anybody who is kind of like wavering or teetering, just thinking like, well, I can do this, just trust yourself and see that it's possible, and there is help and support, and it makes it so much more peaceful and quicker than doing it on your own.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
Yeah.
And I do think, right, of course, like there are so many things we can do on our own. And so many of us are so resourceful, right? It's kind of like what you were saying. Some people will, of course, choose to do it on their own. Some people will choose to join the membership, right? You just want to decide what works for you. Again, with what you're saying, like thinking about what do I want for myself long term, right? What version of myself do I want to be, and how can I best help myself make that my reality?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's so nice to have that support, to know that I am on the right path. And that alone, I think, is invaluable.
So, yeah. So good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey and your wisdom with all of this. I know that it will inspire so many other women to really like light that spark in themselves, or let it burn a little stronger where they can see it in themselves too. Because I think, just like you were saying about the support and being around other women, the more we can hear a variety of stories about women living in the body they want, with the freedom they want, feeling the way they want without the rules, I think it just makes it easier for other people to be like, oh, I think I could have that too if I want it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the possibility of it is just so amazing. And I'm so glad I found it and went through it, and am doing it and living it. This is joy. It's so joyful to be here. So
amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey friend, if you're enjoying the podcast, I invite you to come and check out the Naturally Thin for Life membership at naturallythinforlife.com/join, where you'll learn the full Naturally Thin method broken down into simple and doable steps so that you lose the weight you want peacefully and rapidly and keep it off with ease for the rest of your life. The Naturally Thin for Life membership provides you with the tools to not only lose the weight you want, but customize your mindset and your habits to your unique body and life. As part of the membership, you also get an implementation workbook to ensure your inevitable success. Head over to naturallythinforlife.com/join to get an inside look and tour of the Naturally Thin for Life membership. Hear from countless women who've utilized the tools and the extraordinary successes they've been able to achieve. I hope you join us over there at naturallythinforlife.com/join.